Celebrating diversity, this is Bristol's BCFM 93.2.
It's Friday, it's 5 o'clock. Welcome to BCFM's Politics Show. I'm Tony Gosling, helping me review this week's news. One of the Queen's representatives in the city, former Deputy Lord Lieutenant, or possibly Lord Lieutenant, he's going an interview soon, David John. Old Labour Oxford economist Martin Summers is here too. After the 6 o'clock news, how was the Global Climate Panel chosen, and can we trust them? At the present rate, how many years until the polar ice caps disappear completely? And why are some scientists saying a nuclear war and a nuclear winter that followed it would be good because it would stop global warming? Are there any scientists who are being straight with us rather than in the pocket of one interest group or another? And why are these basic questions about climate change not even asked, let alone answered? Plus, Hillary Clinton's health. Is it really pneumonia? Her coughing fits have been happening all year. And why isn't Bernie Sanders being suggested to take over from her if she drops out of the US presidential race? Also, taking no chances, how Israel stole the atomic bomb from the United States. And they had them in place by 1966, an entire year before the Six-Day War, where the IDF kicked Egyptian, Syrian and Jordanian forces out of East Jerusalem and stole the occupied territories from the Palestinians, the so-called buffer zone. Plus China's territorial dispute with the US-backed Philippines, where their president Duterte this week is accused of running death squads in his own country, as well as himself actually murdering his opponents. Plus Martin Summers' chance to take us on a tour of the world's hotspots in the second hour.
And it's Bristol's One Love Breakfast live on your radio, BCFM 93.2.
A full brekkie team in studio, in position, ready and roaring to go.
On the 1st of October, the One Love Breakfast Show is going to see a big change.
New voices, new features,
a new style.
We're going back to our roots,
to the heart of our community.
The 1st of October, 7 till 10 a.m. on BCFM.
BCFM Radio is positively Bristol and has been serving you for nearly 10 years. Don't be fooled by online imitations claiming to be local. BCFM is a committed group of over 200 volunteers representing virtually every aspect and every area of Bristol life. So thank you for making BCFM 93.2 Bristol's #1 for representing the entire city. We are your multi-award-winning radio station, BCFM 93.2.
You must not believe anything that you hear on this show or from anyone else in this entire world, whether you hear it on radio or on television or from the lips of someone standing right in front of you. Listen to everything, believe nothing until you can prove. You must learn how to find the truth and prove it. If you can't do that, you might as well turn off your radio.
Well, we start this week, very pleased to welcome to the studio from Oslo, Norway, Torstein Vidal. Hi Torstein, welcome to the Politics Show.
Hi Tony, good to be back.
You were here actually maybe a couple of years ago, was it? Maybe even 3 years ago, talking about... 4! Let's get on and talk about what you're here to discuss this week, and that is the giant ice cube, really. I mean, this is the way I see it, is that every time you've got a drink with ice in it, this is a little model of climate change, because it's all very well, your drink is fine, all the time that ice is still there, and as soon as that ice finishes melting, suddenly the temperature of your drink, and this is all very important to us all folks, the temperature of your drink starts to go up at quite a rate. I mean, the ice really is a moderator of the temperature, and whilst it's disappearing, nobody really noticed much of a change. So I suppose the ultimate question is, how long do you think we've got until the ice disappears entirely? Because it certainly is disappearing.
Well, the debate is really about when will the ice disappear completely, for one day or just a short while every summer.
You mean absolutely no ice? So the Arctic Circle would just be disappeared. So there would be just, I think, isn't it sea underneath the Arctic? It would just become sea.
Basically, it's called a blue ocean event. Yeah.
Okay, so when is that going to happen, do you think, if you're looking at the projections?
Well, according to Peter Wadhams, the Cambridge professor of oceanography for 40 years, it's about now. It's like 2016 plus or minus.
Yeah, but it hasn't happened, has it?
It doesn't happen, but it's, you know, every year you have different weather in the Arctic and around the world, and when the data and the trend line goes down to about 2016 plus or minus 3 years, that means it's this year or next year, basically.
So what's the latest anyway? And because you have a summer melt season, what's the latest news on this?
Well, this year, 2016, has been exceptional in so many ways, and it's the lowest ever for two-dimensional sea ice extent and ice area, when averaged from January to September, or even from last September to this September, and also most likely the record low for January to December. So it's pretty darn low, although maybe not lowest ever for the absolute lowest day of the year, which is in mid-September.
Okay, are there any estimates for which the Arctic will be ice-free? I mean, we've sort of mentioned that, haven't we? Farewell to ice. Peter Wadhams, I mean, you seem to be citing him quite a lot. Is there any evidence that he is just an honest scientist and he's not backed by anybody? Why do you talk about Wadhams?
Well, Peter Wadhams, he released his book A Farewell to Ice, which is sort of the end of his research career in the Arctic and Antarctic this summer, and he's talking in the book about the end of ice as we know it, basically. And in the sense that the Arctic used to have sea ice every day of the year, and now the data for ice volume showed a trend for at least one ice per day, starting, as I said, just about 2016.
Also, there's also something happened this year, I believe, where the ships are actually making their way across what was originally icy seas, so they wouldn't be able to get through, or maybe you'd have to send an icebreaker through. And I believe we're now expecting a ship back to Bristol, which is some kind of, am I right, a sailing ship, which is making its way through there without not a proper icebreaker, which will be coming back to Bristol soon. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think it's a yacht. I don't know how many feet or anything, but it first traversed the Northern Sea route, which is along the Siberian coast. And then the other Arctic passage, which is the Northwest Passage along Alaska and Canada to Greenland. And it's heading for Bristol now. I think it's in the Baffin Bay.
Yeah, so what's the significance of that? Is it because because of the ice melting back, that some parts of the year, areas of the seas are more accessible than they were before?
Absolutely, and all the fossil fuel industries are also waiting eagerly to be able to move into the Arctic Ocean to start pumping oil and gas, only to increase the problem of global warming even more.
What about criminal complacency? This is some quote you gave me. This comes from a Cambridge professor. This is Wadham, I guess, again. Arctic sea ice over the last 40 to 50 years. To what extent is this UN climate change panel, the IPCC, actually doing what it's supposed to be doing, and how independent is it? Because I know you've looked into who's on it and how they were appointed.
First I can say that there's a huge difference in the estimates from Peter Wadhams and to the climate panel, where the climate panel is more like saying that your young kids, or maybe their future children, may be around to see the first day with no ice, not you or I, and definitely not this year or next year. So these extremely conservative estimates for the ice and for global warming made Professor Wadhams call the climate panel criminally complacent in a recent interview.
Does this mean that computer models haven't really developed since the 1990s? I mean, surely, there must be some kind of peer review going on here where various scientists are critiquing it, publishing the critiques, and that there's some sort of agreement. It just seems to me that you've got a massive divergence of views with no proper settling down of scientific opinion.
Exactly. I think the reason is that the computer models, they only include the known mechanisms to science today, and only the stuff that we have numbers for and that are well known. The real ice loss trends, on the other hand, are based on the full destructive force working on the ice. That's written down in the data. So that gives you sort of the full system response. And as it happens, the criminally complacent IPCC timelines, they happen to suit the industrialist and the fossil fuel lobby very well. So that's kind of strange.
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe worth introducing at this point one of my analysis, which I've done over the last few years, helped by correspondents on the internet who've read my articles, commented on those articles, emailed me, etc. And this is really to do with the oil industry's power back in the 1950s and 1960s, when the North Sea oil was first discovered. Now, Torstein, the Norwegians have dealt very differently, haven't they, to the British in the way they've dealt with oil. How have you done things over in Norway?
I'm not an expert in that, but I think when Norwegians discovered oil and started their state-owned oil company, there was a greater share of the revenue going back to the Norwegian state, to use for societal purposes.
Martin, challenge what you're saying, Torstein, is in this BBC article is saying that this week the Arctic sea ice reached the second lowest extent ever recorded by satellites. Well, that's only the second lowest ever, so it's not every year it's been shrinking, clearly.
No, there's a difference between the lowest ever for the one lowest day, which is generally in mid-September. So what I've looked at, and lots of other people have looked at, is what is the average over the summer or over the entire year, and then 2016 is the lowest since satellite records began in 1979. So it's the lowest in the trend so far, and it's. Everything, if you look at the trend and the graph for the trend based on the data for sea ice extent and volume, it's straight down, and it's. I've compared it to the curve. If you sail a ship from Portugal to Southampton and you had completed 80% of its journey, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out when you will be at port in Southampton. It's like. Quite obvious calculation to make, and in Peter Wadham's case, it's like from 0 to 1 year from now.
But that's surely is. I mean, that's just an exaggeration. Surely, I mean, it's shrinking bit by bit. But I mean, you're not going to tell me that next summer there's going to be no ice at all in the Arctic
for one day. That's what we're talking about, and. What I've done myself is to study the sea ice data from the orbiting satellites.
So you can get access to that, can you, if you want?
Yeah, that's public information. Right. And I'm actually writing now a non-fiction book explaining exactly what is happening to the ice and where you can get the data yourself and look at it, so you don't have to trust these scientists or these politicians.
Well, the climate change panel. Let's just go back to look at them for a minute, because how were they set up, and why is it that you don't trust them?
In the they were set up like from 1986. It started pre-set up, and they emerged in 1988. And by then, a number of scientists had started to speak up about a very real need for political action to stop greenhouse gas emissions. But the energy is a very lucrative business, as we all know. And so we had the so-called climate panel, and their 2 feet or so of sea level rise by the magical year 2100. And these corrupt forecasts, if you will, have been used to sideline the scientists calling for immediate action to stop the impending collapse of human civilization. So it's pretty huge crime we're talking about here, right?
So, but I mean, surely it's not going to mean... I mean, it might mean that we have to put our woolly jumpers on, but surely... Or actually, no, have to take our woolly jumpers off in the winter. But surely not human civilization is not under threat by this, is it?
Well, not only that, Tony. Even the biosphere itself is naturally threatened by a runaway, self-reinforcing heating of the planet. Our civilization, our way of living, is just higher up on the list of things that are going to collapse in a rapidly warming world. If our key food production collapses, mainly due to sea level rise and sick weather, civilization has no grain and rice to store for winter and collapses upon us.
Martin, this is one of the sort of original things that human societies did, wasn't it? And you can almost start to chart the rise of civilization from the first time that grain was stored, this kind of thing. And it looks what Torstein's saying is we may have no grain to store at some point in the not too distant future.
Well, I think that's quite possibly the case, but I think we're also underestimating the danger of nuclear war. And
Torstein, what about this idea that nuclear winter might be actually quite good for cooling things down and stopping global warming?
Well, then there are plenty of these ideas around, and Wadhams is one of the people who are talking about technical ways to delay climate change or global warming.
Climate war.
Yeah. and of course, obviously, some kind of nuclear winter would set back the collapse of the sea ice by 2 years or 3 years. But it's no, you would kill off a lot of animals and river systems and fish, and, it's not the ideal solution in any case.
So is Wadhams one of the people who's advocating a nuclear war so that we can slow down global warming?
Absolutely not, but he has one of these geoengineering suggestions. It's basically just to pump white bubbles of sea water into the lower clouds and then making a cloud brightening effect, which will reflect more of the solar more of the sun rays back into space and save the ice from melting.
These sorts of geoengineering, I'm always a little bit nervous about them. Isn't it the best thing to do just to stop burning fossil fuels?
Yeah, of course, Peter Wadhams and a lot of other so-called climate scientific activists suggested maybe cutting back on the emissions already in the 80s, right? So it's not like it hasn't been suggested, but the fossil fuel lobby and the energy industry, they set up this nice United Nations climate panel, didn't they? And they think we have a very long time to fix this problem.
So how long do you think until civilization is actually threatened? I realise you actually think that in a way, to a certain extent, the activism is over because the climate change, the fossil fuel lobby has won the battle.
Yeah, basically. When I'm writing this non-fiction book, it's more or less to warn other good people and make them able to prepare for what is coming and or to enjoy their lives, whatever number of decades they have remaining.
I mean, we're hearing from the Germans, this is on the nuclear war side, Martin, potentially, or war anyhow, from the Germans and the Swiss, that they're actually saying to their citizens, you should make sure you've got at least 10 days supply of food and water in your homes.
Well, that's because they're also potentially going to be some kind of false flag terrorist attack in Germany. That's possible. And, of course, there also is a potential for war with Russia, because that's what Hillary Clinton is banging the drum for as we speak. And, she's making it pretty clear that that's what she wants. And the Russians, of course, are behaving relatively calmly. And it's a good job that they are being calm. If they had a more hysterical leadership, we'd already be over the brink. But it's far more dangerous than people realise.
Torstein, it does seem as if a lot of this debate is being controlled, whether it's through the funding for the scientists or whether it's through the London media, we in this country, the international media. What do you see as some basic things that we should be doing to sort this out? I mean, if you were appointed to head the UN, I mean, I don't actually think that the head of the UN can make a difference. It's the head of the big oil companies and the banks that seem to be really in the driving seat. But what changes would you like to see?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I think I would pick Peter Wadhams to head the IPCC, the climate panel. And then I would urge every nation on Earth to translate A Farewell to Ice and make it compulsory reading in public schools, so that people could be warned about, how to deal with all of these crises coming.
What in a nutshell? What's he saying in Farewell to Ice? Then he's saying that we're really in. I mean, he sounds to me as if he's one of the most alarmist of all of these climate scientists. I mean, if he's saying that there's no ice virtually now, I mean, he's just simply not right, is he?
Well, the thing is, he's found out that he's looked at the thickness of the Arctic ice, and he found out that from the 70s to the 1990s, there was a 60% drop in the total volume of ice.
Okay, so it's one thing to look at it from space, but you need to actually measure how much ice you can see underneath you. You're only getting a two-dimensional picture from space.
The thing is, he sailed under the Arctic sea ice in submarines. That's part of his 40-year experience in the polar oceans. And the shocking thing is that from the 1970s to 2010s, there was an 80% drop in Arctic sea ice. So Wadhams actually tried to warn people at Whitehall in the early 90s, but it was just rudely dismissed by people there, claiming that no, there's no problem with the Arctic ice. It will last to the end of the 21st century, which is, just ridiculous rubbish.
But hang on a minute, Martin. People have got a rapacious appetite for, number one, getting to and from work, and number two, using electricity at home.
Yeah, well, in that case, we've got to redesign our way of life to be less destructive of the planet, and that's going to involve redistribution of wealth from the relatively prosperous to the poor. That's got to be part of it.
Is there any prospect of that, do you think, Torstein?
No, I think I totally agree with Martin that we should have a fair and just planet and treat southern people better and, basically be nice to each other. But I don't think there's time enough for any of that before we basically hit a brick wall.
You're sounding a bit pessimistic about all this.
Not really pessimistic. It's more like I've been a climate or environmental activist for 30 or 35 years. And what I found is that, we should have tried something like that, like in the 80s. And so it's kind of, to me personally, I think it's a relief to just realize, okay, and try to accept what is coming.
And write a book about it. Okay.
Of course. Can I just make a comment, Tony, which is, I think there's going to be a financial crash, and that financial crash will then lead to a major economic depression that will make the 1930s look like a Sunday afternoon tea party. Now, one of the effects of such a crash will be to massively reduce the use of fossil fuels, coal, etc. Now, in other words, then you will then have an opportunity to rebuild after the crash without increasing the amount of fossil
handy,
fuels
isn't
that
it?
you
Because
use.
if you get your war as well, there won't be any oil coming in.
Well, if we get a nuclear war, we won't be able to discuss any of it anyway. There'll be nobody left to argue, will there?
Well, I don't think even after a nuclear war, there might be some people left. What about, Torstein, what about you've talked about the collapse of civilization. Could this lead to the extinction of life, do you think, completely? And what's the prospect of that if things do go completely wrong with the climate and it starts heating up? Obviously, after it gets to a certain extent, it might just start heating, and there's nothing we can do about it and go past any kind of hope of equilibrium.
Well, I think life on Earth in general, if you're talking about every kind of life on Earth, is pretty sturdy, and it has survived at least 3 billion years so far. So, it comes down to what kind of life are we talking about? Are we talking about single-cell organisms or cockroaches, or are we talking about sentient, intelligent life with a vertebrate backbone or something?
Well, who knows? You might end up with sentient cockroaches. Who knows?
Yes, once we've been
Over to you, Martin.
Once we've been cleared out of the way, they've got a free run, haven't they?
Okay, just finally, I mean, we will be covering this when this ship gets back in October, back to Bristol. Torsten, I'll just give the final word to you. If one of the things we like to be able to do is just think of one thing we can do to change the way we do things, which is actually going to make a difference. Is it past that? Are the structures of society, the use of fossil fuels, so embedded that it's very difficult for any individual to really make a small difference themselves?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much too late for any new good ideas to solve it.
What's your book? Okay, but what's your book called and when's it out?
It's going to be out in October, and it's going to be something about ice, but I can't say yet.
Okay, Torstein Vidal from Oslo, Norway, thanks very much for joining us on The Politics Show.
Thanks to you.
Getting bigger by being better. The number one choice for Bristol. This is BCFM 93.2.
Yeah, Martin.
Hello, I'm Thorstein Vidal, and I'll be your tour guide through the collapse of Arctic sea ice and industrial civilization in the coming months. So, I hope you are sitting comfortably, and I have to remind you that seatbelts are mandatory on this ride. Please buckle up. But first, a bit of introduction. I grew up in Norway like most Norwegians do, but in my teens I noticed, like Neo, that there was something terribly wrong with the world. This brought me to climate activism at 17 or 18. And I was, of course, very much impatient with our politicians. When were they going to act to actually save the Earth? All they would do was talk, endlessly, and their actions never matched their fine words, quite the contrary. And they even threw me in jail for trying to stop a motorway. Enough said, but it is in fact illegal to try and save her. And still to this day illegal to drive a car or fly through the air as much as you want instead of riding your bicycle. 10 years ago, I walked up the slopes to a big glacier here in Hardanger. I had taken a break from climate change for half a decade, doing other stuff like anti-war activism. So when local farmers told me that the ice was 5 or 10 meters lower in just a few years, it reminded me, and I felt guilt for having done other stuff. Once again, I had to face the fact there was only fine words from these politicians. They had actually done nothing. Which means they'd done less than nothing. Just increased growth in any way possible, and pumped up emissions like there was no tomorrow. So this has been the case all along. For all of you younger folks listening to this, who think these guys really mean it now, well, they never really meant what they said about climate. Sorry, it was all smoke and mirrors. Through the window on your left and right, you can see the ice now. Looking down at the Arctic Ocean, we see the area or extent that is covered by floating sea ice. This two-dimensional view can tell us a lot of things, but for the real story of Arctic ice collapse, we need thickness, 3 dimensions, submarines or satellites measuring how far down into the water ice goes. The main collapse of Arctic ice is happening in thickness, giving us a total volume of ice. This is the total amount that you need to melt if you are the Earth systems trying to break the ice to flush out industrial civilization. The number one tipping point of global warming is the disappearance of Arctic sea ice. We didn't know that back then. When I chained myself to a digger to halt the building of a new motorway, the late November sea ice volume was at 20,000 cubic kilometers. When they sent me to jail for that, it was at 17,000. This year it was record low and at 7,000 cubic kilometers. The complete disappearance of Arctic sea ice will first be a late summer thing, and a handful of years later, it'll be an all-year thing. It will mean that sun rays will go straight into blue ocean rather than be reflected out into space. 4.5 times more of them will be heating the water, and they will no longer have to melt ice. On a sunny day in the last year of sea ice, sun would only manage to make a cubic kilometer of 0 Celsius water from ice at 0 Celsius. While with that ice gone, the 0 Celsius ocean water could be heated by the same amount of sunshine to 4.5 times 80 Celsius. That's 360 degrees Celsius, and of course mixing with colder water and not actually boiling. This is why the loss of sea ice is the bomb. Forget about H-bombs. The liquid H2O that should be frozen is far worse than any nukes, and you can't duck and cover. This is why the question is no longer when they are going to act to actually save the Earth, but when the ice will be gone and reveal the bomb. When you average the volume of ice over a year, we are currently just about 12,000 cubic kilometers in the Arctic. The decline is now so fast that we would lose all ice all through the year by 2020 to 22 at the current speed of collapse. If the speed doesn't increase, there'll be winter ice left in 2019, at the end of this current decade. If hampered or slowed for any reason, we will still be able to see some ice from our window in the dark Arctic winter, even at the start of the new decade. If the previous decade was called the OOs, this current decade may be the oops. When will the ice be gone and the bomb revealed? That is very much the question. In fact, you don't need ice to be gone in the dark polar night or the winter in order to release this bomb. It's enough that the ice is gone when the sun returns in April. That will, of course, happen even earlier than the first year of no ice at all, even no ice in winter. What I did in November in order to find the answer to when was to ask my apps a different question. Instead of asking the apps when we last saw a similar collapse rate in the past, I now ask them how soon in the future we will lose all ice with that current collapse rate. I thus created a so-called lag cloud, which is a tag cloud filled with years and months with these suggestions for when. The more frequent suggestions for years and months will have a larger font in these lag clouds, signifying higher confidence or increased likelihood for that year or month to be the right answer. Over the month, I gravitated towards making a whole new graph, using the coming few years as my y-axis. If I say we lose 156 cubic kilometers every month, people will mostly be like, meh, not knowing what to make of such a number, or such a huge chunk of ice. Yet when I simply say 2022, that is something we can all relate to. We've all got plans for 2022, whether or not we are aware of those plans yet. If we have kids, we may think, that's when my kid will start college or university. Or we may be thinking about retiring around that time. The bottom line is that 2022 is relevant to all of us, and we can relate. Climate scientist Paul Beckwith famously stated that what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. This isn't Vegas, guys. Changes in the Arctic do not merely affect the polar bears or the seals or the krill, it will be rough times for everyone and every living being on this planet. Further evidence people care when you say 2022 instead of just 156 cubic kilometers per month is when the so-called slowists begin attacking you. That is their way of showing how much they care. Slowists don't want you to say out loud when sea ice will most likely be gone for a day or indeed an entire year. They prefer scientists to tell them after the fact that this catastrophic development was faster than expected. Scientists are supposed to be wrong all the time, and without exception to be wrong on the relaxed and conservative side. Then, when the shit hits the fan 100 years before their incompetent models, they all go, oops, faster than expected, guys. Now, these slowists may be hard to distinguish from the more common deniers, but if you closely study their plumage, there are certain differences. The slowist doesn't explicitly deny global warming. He or she will say that we obviously have global warming. Mostly they'll also say it is man-made. Yet they do not believe we have abrupt climate change. Rather, they believe in a very slow and gradual type of climate change, often seemingly forgetting the change part and reverting back to talk about weather and annual fluctuations determining everything we see in the Arctic. They may even appear to be math deniers. If you say we have 9 million square kilometers of sea ice and lose 100,000 a month, they will be angry if you do the math and say it will only last 90 months. All this is natural and part of the stages of grief. You do the math and you open a can of worms.
Sometimes it's good to take things down a few hatches and just spell it out, what our differences really are in clear terms. Ice blogger Nevin Curlin thinks Arctic sea ice collapse will be slower than current collapse rates. I've said I simply don't know. I'm not a psychic, so I just can't know whether collapse will be slower or faster. All I do know is that current collapse rate is catastrophic. Maybe we need a stronger word, by the way. How about infernal? At current rate of collapse for volume, we will be out of ice in 2019, in winter, with no daylight for months on end. 2019, I'm not kidding you. That's linear collapse. And of course, the current rate only needs to be the average rate of collapse over the next 30-something months. The final collapse of ice will probably not be linear, but exponential. The infernal consequences of final collapse cause a lot of resistance against doing the math, or even understanding the math done by others. It's like when priests didn't want to look in Galileo's telescope. In fact, someone recently called me Vidileo Vidilei on an ice blog. Galileo's books were banned, and the Inquisition sentenced him to prison for defending his astronomical ideas. I got banned like he got banned, but here's the thing. In order to do the math, you need to apply an average. They say they do not understand an average. I present winter blue ocean date based on current daily trends, weekly, monthly, quarterly, half-yearly and yearly trends. They say I predict and extrapolate. Maybe you can help me. Obviously, the daily trend is too random and the decadal trend too static.
Which period for loss of average ice should I use in this rapid collapse phase to get the best answer to when winter ice is gone? Using a linear decline is a conservative and default solution, but we can't know if the coming years will lose ice slower or faster than current trends. I believe we need to know when the ice is lost and the shop closed.
Hello, and a happy new year to all of you. I am Thorstein Vidal, your Norwegian tour guide through the collapse of Arctic sea ice and industrial civilization. Once again, I must warn you that this will be a rough ride, and that seatbelts are mandatory. For your own safety, please buckle up. First of all, I want you to close your eyes and pretend that you are a child again. It's Christmas, and there's snow at the railway station when you arrive. There's snow in the slopes where your grandparents live, and snow on the mountain you see from their living room window. When we arrived, we would always run up the stairs to the attic, my sisters and I, and grab a bunch of ancient Donald comic magazines from the 1950s and 60s. Stories we'd never read before. Plenty for all the days of the Yuletide. Back down in the living room, there were all the Christmas smells, cookies, cigars, flowers. Pure bliss for us children. And on top of all this, a giant globe that was lit from the inside, functioning as a blue lamp. All of the nations on this earth were on that globe, on the top of the telly. All oceans, all mountains, all deserts and rainforests. If you wanted to, you could place a letter on top of this globe and succeed in balancing it so it would stay. Although the Arctic wasn't entirely flat, it was flat enough for your letter. And yet this was of course the only place on the globe you could do that. Further south, to the left or the right of the top of the globe, your letter would simply fall off the globe. This is because the Earth isn't flat. If you let your finger run down all the way from the North Pole to the equator, you've gone 1/4 of a full circle, and from horizontal to vertical. Along the way, the globe surface goes steeper and steeper until it's straight down at the equator. That movement you just did with your finger is also the way the volume of the sea ice in the Arctic is collapsing. Slowly at first, and then faster and faster. Today, we are just south of Paris, at about 45 degrees, or halfway to equator and 0 degrees. And we know we will go south faster and faster. Some say the surface, or rather the collapse trend line, is flat or linear. You can come to that conclusion using wishful thinking, cherry picking, or fear of the answer to the biggest question facing humanity. When will the ice be gone even in winter? We may have every reason to fear the answer, as the planet's foremost ice blogger has linked collapse of winter sea ice to collapse of industrial civilization. But a rational and scientific analysis, not based in emotions or feelings, will tell you the Earth isn't flat, and the collapse trend is not linear. This is the difference between abrupt climate change and the slow climate change you heard about in school. These days, of course, Grandma and Grandpa are gone. The snow on that mountain is gone. And Donald is President of the United States of America. You may open your eyes now. So, when I return a bit to to my trip 10 years ago to that glacier, and while I do it, I will just try to code a new graph, so we'll see how that goes. Speaking and programming at the same time. So I came to Odda with the bus in the early morning, and I walked up the hills and into the valley to this glacier in Hardanger. And I remember I saw some goats who were caught on a mountain, what do you call it? Some kind of mountain plateau with some cliffs. And I tried to talk to some farmers about that, you know, me the city boy telling the farmers how to save their goats or whatever. And turned out the goats were more than capable of taking care of themselves. So, but then these farmers would tell me about the glacier itself, which I hadn't gotten to yet, and how that had shrunk so much just in the latest years, like 5 meters or 10 meters thinner ice on the biggest glacier in Hardanger. So then I proceeded up the really steep hills, you know, like you have these U-shaped valleys that are carved by gigantic glaciers many thousand years ago. Maybe several glaciations, you know, like 5 or 6 different ice ages contributing to this super deep and very steep valley. So up to the glacier, and I forgot to mention that this was, you know, like mid-October or something in 2006, and even though it was morning and mid-October, it was really hot, really warm, like 20 degrees Celsius or something, right? So it felt very, should I say, scary, or, you know, varying to have that kind of temperature. So basically a very laborious, heavy trip with my backpack and my tent and everything on my back up to where the glacier is, like maybe 800 or 1,000 vertical meters up. And yeah, to make a long story short, I got all kinds of emotional and sentimental and every kind of thing like that. And I also made some notes, you know, like in my tent in the evening. I just wrote like 5 or 6 sheets of paper, just, you know, feeling like it was some kind of external voice or something coming down from the glacier, some kind of inspiration, some kind of alvor, some kind of seriousness, or you know, this is for real in a way. And Even though I kept the notes, I only found them in my flat when I was moving out of central Oslo a year ago. I briefly found them and then they went lost again. And that's like just how it is. But in any case, the point isn't really what was in those notes, because I think those notes were pretty confused anyway, you know? It's like you get this feeling or emotion, but you don't really know what you're supposed to do with it or what it really means. So, of course, I kind of interpreted it as, now it's time for you to, realize you're grown up, you are single, you need to find some kind of woman and make a kid and go on with your life, you know? I guess everybody has had that feeling once or twice in their life, at least. So it's like you see this vast white stretch of ice, which is, 1,000,000 times bigger than you are, if not 1,000,000,000 times bigger. And you are so small, you're in the mountain, you are so incredibly little, like a little ant, and what's it all for, and all kinds of philosophical or semi-religious questions coming up. But as I said, I think we have to kind of interpret it, seeing it in a new light. And I think I think what that glacier reminded me of was how everything is sort of limited, or days are numbered in a way, So even though I had no idea back in 2006 how, to what incredible degree our days would be numbered, because, I had just barely been scraping the surface of this whole climate situation back then. But I have been very, very into climate in the way that a teenager or a 20-something can be into it, because at that age you are naive, you believe mass media. Even though you don't believe every politician, you believe that maybe some politician could be actually honest about caring about it. And if not in Norway, maybe somebody in the UN, United Nations, in New York or Geneva or whatever. Somebody had to be doing their job, getting paid millions for eating gala luncheons and everything. Maybe some of them were still, doing an honest job to save the climate. But no. So I'm kind of interpreting it as a reminder this existence is limited. It's not eternal. And I think that's what brought me back to studying the climate, was that October mountain trip to the glacier. So I kind of like that, because I've always felt that nature communicates to you if you're ready to listen. So, but now I need to focus a bit on this graph thing. So I'm kind of looking into this paradigm thing I've been talking about. That we are amazingly in another of these scientific paradigm shifts, where views or theories or interpretations of the same data differ violently between different factions of scientists or people, or like politically or otherwise motivated people who seemingly are unable to see what the other group is stating. And I find that pretty fascinating, actually. So what I'm doing now is that I'm trying to put together some sort of Google chart that can communicate exactly what I'm talking about, right? In a clear picture, a clear view graph. So it's a little bit of coding, but you can just lie there, can't you? And record what I'm saying. I just won't be talking all the time. So I'm working with the sea ice volume, because that is the most significant indicator for the sea ice collapse, and the sea ice collapse in its turn is the most significant indicator for climate change. So it sort of all boils down to Arctic sea ice volume. And even that is, based on very questionable data from the University of Washington, the biomass computer model, which has grid cells that are like 40 kilometers times 40 kilometers. So it's, huge, really huge coarse sort of pixels, and has lots of limitations because they cannot pick up every kind of variation of some open water in between the ice and stuff. So I got a new title for an old graph. I'm sort of recycling an old functioning graph. Instead of writing everything from scratch, I just copy and rename a file. And then just change some parameters, like font size and title and stuff like that.